What is it that's made you so readily supportive of our trying out a new approach within the office? As you think about your role as dean, kind of the person who's tending to the institution's interest in supporting religious life and a new way of going about it, what's made you want to support this?
For me, one of the things, my background is obviously in sociology. One of the things that we often talk about in sociology, or one of the biggest things we talk about, right, are institutions. Something that, I'm constantly kind of engaged in conversations with students about is really the pace and the trickle of thinking about change at a level of the institution, given the various kind of, stakeholders who are involved, the different values and norms that go into kind of that inform institutions. And so for me, one thing in terms of that kind of background that's been really important is to really be averse to kind of, I think, long-term institutionalization in some ways. Earlier when we were talking and, Liz had mentioned I was kind of like the institution. I was like, oh no, like I'm frozen now. It's something that in some ways I think at a personal level is something that, I guess, I don't want to use the word frightening, but it's something that I'm very kind of averse to more personally. And so, when I heard the ideas that you all had around kind of how to rethink RSL and student engagement, I thought it was really much in line with the idea of, to think about these institutions and the possibilities of them changing really requires some risk taking. It has to be well planned out and has to be organized and have certain kind of, values and things that inform it, as well as involvement of various kind of groups of people to think about that change. But I'm very open to those notions of change because in the end, one of the things that we learn about institutions, right, is that they're incredibly resistant to change. And so, someone trying in some ways to change something may not it can have a significant impact, but, a project that may have tried really well and then we just figured out this actually doesn't work, doesn't necessarily impact the institution long term. And so I think that there's really low risk in allowing for these kinds of projects. So in other words, I think of it as all we have is really an incredible amount to gain, by this. The other thing, I think more directly related to kind of our campus population on Vassar really has to do with a shift in the student body that we saw here, I think, since the beginning of my time. And by that, I mean, when I first got here, I was entering classrooms where, for the most part, everyone was, fairly similar. It was a pretty homogenous kind of campus community, somewhat diverse, but not very diverse. I always tell the story of my first experience teaching a seminar course I teach in sociology called Race and Popular Culture, where, of the 16 students who were in the class, one was a person of color. To, now, or, the last couple of iterations of that course, it's an incredibly diverse in terms of the population demographically of that course, where actually the white student population is actually maybe 20% of the students who are in that class. And so seeing these kind of really drastic demographic changes really requires to think about what are the kind of needs of these students. And so for many of our students who come from first generation, low income, undocumented backgrounds, right, many of them come from, heavily kind of religious backgrounds, or their families who practice some form of, one religion or another. And they would often talk about it, but they kind of felt like, they didn't have the capacity or the space to think about it, but not just in terms of their relationship to their family and growing up kind of in a particular denomination, but what was the relationship between that and many of the interests that they develop on our campus related to kind of environmental justice, racial justice. And so in thinking about this concept that you all were really wanting to put forward, I thought that there could be really, interesting ways, one, to think about institutional change, but two, to really make some really intimate connections between the backgrounds and the languages that many of our students, right, and by language, I'm thinking about kind of things that many of our students may be comfortable in, right, in a place that is historically maybe not felt comfortable for them. And so how can they take a language around justice, for example, that may have been rooted in a particular religious community that they were a part of, and kind of make it, imbricate or enmesh it into some of the things that they were learning inside the classroom. Because I think, historically at Vassar, those have been seen as diametrically opposed, but I actually see them as very intimately connected.